Yelan's camp hadn't been that far from Ganyu and Keqing's own, having originally been a treasure hoarders group's own, up until Yelan had taken matters into her own hands. She'd known the thugs were far from just innocent pedestrians by their load of a variety of goods that carried a label of a store from one of Liyue Harbor's once food establishments. It had been clearly stolen using brute and vile methods, so she had just returned the favor in kind. Seeing Liyue Harbor had gone up in flames, and the luggage no longer had a home, she had decided to keep them for survival in her current situation of being homeless and having no resources. Along with that was a tent and several secret documents that she had no interest in, seeing they pertained to the city now under the sea, making them meaningless. The only thing Yelan had left of Liyue Harbor besides the two survivors of the Keqing was her intelligence and anything else that had been on her person before the night of the tragedy. Therefore, she had no reason to keep hush about anything anymore, seeing if she was going to have any chance to get even with the enemy who killed her spies and everything that kept her going, she was going to need all the help she could get. Okay, girls, let's get one thing clear. Yelan started, her tone the equivalent of a mother disciplining their child. Starchovsky, the man you plan to trap and wring information out of, is much smarter than you think. Ningguang only gave you the tip of the iceberg, when in reality, she knew just how dangerous and complex our little friend is. Rezhov Starchovsky has been in the Fatui's highest ranks for a long time, and has been in them for over 3 decades. That means he knows basically every trick of the trade, including the greatest knowledge of the Tsaritsa. And if someone is trained and mentored by a goddess, you definitely know they are not easily fooled or manipulated. I'd bet he was even offered a spot amongst the Harbingers, but decided not to take it. Why didn't he take it? Well, that's where things get even more clear on just how powerful this guy is. Seeing you know as well as me that the 11 Harbingers are the Tsaritsa's strongest soldiers. However, I want you to delete that from your memory for a moment for my next set of words, seeing Starchovsky is clearly well versed in combat, tactics, and mind tricks. Why wouldn't he take that opportunity, ladies? Answer me as if the Harbingers didn't even exist. Ganyu and Keqing followed, thinking of an answer and almost immediately solving the answer. Because he's part of another higher branch. Keqing answered first. We have a winner. Yelan congratulated. Starchovsky is beyond the level of all 11 of the Tsaritsa's best, and I doubt he's the only one part of that specific group of super soldiers. Both Ganyu and Keqing immediately caught on. You're saying that group is the one that attacked and destroyed Liyue Harbor? Keqing guessed. Bingo. Yelan confirmed. The Tianquan and I investigated much deeper into the Fatui's ranks after they attempted to commit mass genocide with the assistance of an ancient sea god. And boy, oh boy, did we find a lot of dirt that had gone under the radar for far too long. We launched a secret operation to figure out just how deep this paydirt went, by sending unrecognizable spies into the very core of the Tsaritsa's capital. They posed as soldiers, and they managed to get into places nobody except the Queen Bee and her most loyal inquirers would even know of. Not even I would have been able to find these places, and that's an accomplishment on its own. Think of Snezhnaya as a massive vault of information that nobody is meant to see, with hundreds of corridors, pathways, and rooms that go so deep underground that you need special equipment to even breathe. Like a set of catacombs designed to cause trespassers to get lost and eventually die. Exactly. Yelan confirmed. One of the spies managed to gain access to the underground, but only reached a very mild level deep. However, that's not the point. What matters is that is where Starchovsky's relation to a secret group came from. In his Northland Bank files, he was only marked as a higher rank officer, but the documents in that underground maze labeled him as otherwise. Therefore, the Tsaritsa is keeping secrets hidden for reasons that not even her harbingers are aware of. A secret group called Yagenti Smeti. The name made shivers run down Ganyu's spine. While she had no idea what it meant, it didn't sit well with her senses. Looks like we finally know who we're up against, along with confirmation that Starchovsky is connected to the monsters who attacked our home, Keqing said. Whether or not it was him specifically who attacked Ganyu or I is unclear. Actually, I think I can confirm it was Starchovsky that I met that night. Ganyu added. Really? How so? Keqing questioned. Remember back in the cave when we made the connection that Reshov had been taunting us with his intent to stand out in a crowd as a form of mockery? Ganyu started, twisting the story by adding a mild emphasis to their destination when they had connected the dots. Keqing caught on and went along with it. Yeah, but how does that tie to your confrontation that night? Because he didn't kill me after killing Ningguang. Ganyu explained. He mocked me by letting me go and made me feel as if I were the reason he was able to finally finish her off. It seems very similar in terms of behavior and personality, don't you think? Yes! Keqing replied in amazement. I'm shocked I didn't realize that connection. That confirms that Yelan's claims are indeed true, and that Starchovsky is indeed an enemy of a plethora of skills. However, the only thing that I haven't figured out is why? What's the motive and gain out of eradicating nations, gods, and leaders? If I knew the answer, I'd tell you. But unfortunately, that's the only thing I don't know. Yelan assured. What I do know is that as your plan currently sits, it'll fall flat on its face. So you need something to assure he will arrive no matter what. What exactly would that be then? Ganyu questioned. You simply need to make him an offer he can't refuse. Give him something he wants that he can't resist. Yelan explained. Like what? Keqing added. You two were there when it all happened, so what did he or any of his friends lose that night that they wanted to finish? The area went silent for a moment, up until Keqing said something that made Ganyu nearly lose her breakfast. Me, Keqing said lowly. It may not have been him specifically, but I got away, and maybe if I was offered, he'd take it out of the pleasure of just finishing a job that his cohort didn't get to. The words caused something to trigger like a switch in Ganyu's psyche, something that made her immediately object in absolute emotional anger. Absolutely not! Ganyu intervened. Your life isn't worth the risk. Keqing and Yelan had both jumped at the sudden exclamation, but could understand Ganyu's immediate frustration. Ganyu, calm down. Keqing attempted. I'm not saying I'm going to do it, just suggested it as an option. Ganyu didn't hear her, realizing why she had suddenly snapped, and it was enough to drive her to an emotional state. Keqing and Yelan eyed her with worry, unsure of what was happening in Ganyu's head. Her face was pale and beginning to moisten with sweat from her pores, finally saying something after a long minute of tense silence. I need to take a walk. Ganyu said, getting up and leaving in a rush. Ganyu, please, wait! Keqing tried, getting to her feet to follow, up until Yelan stopped her. Let her go. Yelan stated calmly. She's hurting and needs some air to clear her mind. Keqing seated herself again, feeling a heavy drought of guilt plague her mind. Was it something I said? Keqing questioned with sorrow. I didn't mean to hurt her. Yelan shook her head. It's not your fault, only the past's. Yelan explained. I saw it in her eyes. The trauma of the past. A past that you accidentally unearthed by suggesting to potentially put yourself out as live bait for our common enemy. Ugh, damn it. I should have thought before I spoke. Ugh. So sorry, Ganyu. Yelan shook her head again. There's no fault in your suggestion, seeing it may be the very course of action we may end up taking. However, let me enlighten you about something that you aren't aware of. Ningguang told me several stories of Ganyu, and how her first years in her occupation were very hard. War brings violence, death, and trauma, and it showed during Ganyu's first years as Ningguang's secretary. She'd go into mental breakdowns and panic attacks upon the sound of the slightest alarm, door slam, or even thunder during storms. In an attempt to cure her, Ningguang sent her to therapy, gave her special privileges while working, and over time, the trauma eventually went dormant. In my eyes, that night that Liyue Harbor went into the ocean caused Ganyu's trauma to rise from its dormant state, and right now, she's clinging onto certain things to keep herself sane. Believe it or not, you're one of those things, Lady Keqing, and considering you two have been dependent on each other since that night, she sees you as something that gives her hope. Keqing was shocked, having never known that Ganyu had once suffered from PTSD caused by the Archon War. It explained a lot, and why she was a recluse and never wanted to endanger anyone if she didn't have to. The dots were connecting, and now Keqing saw Ganyu in a whole different light. She was no longer a half-adeptus workaholic that had a contract to protect Liyue in her eyes, but more of a valiant hero that was heavily damaged beneath the surface. I never knew any of that, and I feel horrible for just throwing myself in the enemy's line of fire as if I'm going to escape unscathed. Keqing confessed, sighing heavily and hanging her head. What do I even say to her to reassure her? It won't be the first time a decision of this caliber is potentially going to be made, so the best thing you can do is show her that you can do it. Yelan responded. War may potentially be on the horizon, and Ganyu may or may not be able to survive it. You are the person she cares the most about right now, so it's best to start with showing her that you'll always be there for her and will never leave her alone. Unlike what I did all those years ago. Keqing nodded in assurance, feeling as if she'd been given a somewhat impossible task, but the truth was that Ganyu gave her hope as well. Therefore, their support for each other was the catalyst for their current position. I'm going to find her, Keqing confirmed, getting up and walking in the direction of Ganyu's footprints. Yelan didn't say anything, and just nodded in confirmation that that was the best course of action for her to do at that moment. It wasn't long before Keqing found her colleague seated along the shoreline of a nearby lake. Her head was down, and an atmosphere composed of sorrow and grief permeated the proximity. It felt as if she were intruding on something private, but she couldn't handle seeing Ganyu like this, so she slowly made her presence known. Ganyu caught her approach almost instantly upon taking 3 steps toward the shore, but she didn't move or say anything, to which Keqing read as a green light to join her. Upon seating herself about 2 feet from Ganyu, the heavy essence of pain, sadness, and grief was strong enough to practically suffocate Keqing. It was as if all of the oxygen had been contaminated by some toxic gas that coagulated into lead blocks upon breathing it into her lungs, the heft becoming nearly unbearable. However, all of the heaviness dissipated upon Ganyu finally breaking the tension. I'm sorry for yelling. Ganyu apologized. It's all right, Ganyu, Keqing said comfortingly. I know you wouldn't be in any danger. It's just that... Ganyu paused for a moment in heavy thought, slowly shifting her eyes to Keqing's and feeling a heaviness corrode her ancient heart. You're all I have left, and I don't want to lose you. I don't want to be alone again. Keqing felt emotion punch her heart upon hearing those words, just wanting to comfort her colleague in warmth and assurance. Ganyu, She trailed immediately, unsure of what to say. However, she didn't have to say anything upon Ganyu speaking something she wasn't expecting. Have you ever lost someone? Ganyu practically whispered. Someone you couldn't even imagine losing, and somehow managed to continue to live after losing them? Keqing just shook her head, not sure where Ganyu was going with this. It's a bizarre and yet dreadful feeling to lose someone you're close to, and can lead you to do things you'd never imagine ever committing in your entire life. Keqing understood, but at the same time was unsure what Ganyu was talking about. Then came her next words. I was only a child when the Archon War first began. A time when I shouldn't have even had to worry about the grievances of war and sorrow. A time when I thought I could be happy forever. I still remember her face and smile, as if it were yesterday. That last comment stung Keqing's heart, knowing exactly where this was going. Her name was Yunha, and she was my best friend up to when I mastered my archery skills, and my vision came into being. We'd play the silliest of games, tell the most bizarre stories, and just live as if we were immortals in a fairy tale. I met her by accident one day while I was taking a break from archery training, and upon the first sight of her, I was terrified. When we first made eye contact, she just stared in absolute wonder, as if I were something she had never seen in her life. She posed no threat though, and after a few meetings at the same spot at the same time, we started to become more friendly with each other. I kept her secret from Cloud Retainer for years, and on my breaks, we'd talk and share stories about our separate kinds. I became fascinated by the stories she told, and for years, we met up in secrecy. As we grew from children into teenagers, we'd do things like exchange books, drink tea, and just enjoy life. We were so close, and like sisters. But all of that came to an end upon the start of the Archon War. I would show up, but she wouldn't. And it wasn't until the day that I went searching along her route to our usual spot that I found out that her village had been attacked by a bunch of thieves and was killed in the process. A single tear escaped both of Ganyu's eyes, and Keqing found herself placing her right hand over her heart in sadness. I cried for so long that I can't even recall the amount of time I had spent there. But when I finally stopped, all I felt was rage. So I decided to unleash all of that rage on the very people responsible for it and track them down. When I finally found them, they looked at me as weak, but my archery skills said otherwise. I shot every single one of them without any sort of remorse or regret. And when I finally reached the last one begging me for mercy, I didn't even listen. After they were dead, it felt as if a wave of emotion hit me. Upon seeing all of those corpses dead from my bloody arrows, I just lost it. I screamed and cried for so long, up until I passed out. In my mind, I was hoping for death to greet me when I awoke, but instead, I was greeted by Morax, who saw my skills as extraordinary and unlike anything he'd ever seen. He offered me a spot by his side in the Archon War, so I took it, hoping it would free me of my guilt and somehow make up for my mistake. It didn't, and instead, I was punished with the grotesque effects of war to one's psyche. Something that still affects me today. To survive the war, I had to stain my hands with so much blood, in hopes that their blood would cleanse me of my ungrateful act. What would Yunha see me as now? That same friend she met with at that same spot? Or an ungrateful and ruthless monster? Ganyu lost it, and Keqing knew exactly why her self-sacrifice idea had led her to this state. That girl had probably been her only friend, and she had lost her to war. Not only that, but it had caused her to become someone she wasn't out of the rage of loss, all because of the war. Keqing embraced her colleague in a warm hug of comfort and understanding, now understanding Ganyu's nature more than ever before. She avoided making friends because she was afraid of losing them, and kept herself hid away in Yuehai Pavilion as a means to never make friends with anyone. It wasn't because of her Qilin instincts, but something more deep and devastating. Keqing held her dear friend tight, showing her that she wouldn't end up like Yunha. She'd do her best to be there with her in every battle and not perish to the acts of war and violence. Hey, I'm not going anywhere anytime soon. She comforted dearly, rubbing Ganyu's back. I'm right here with you, and will be no matter what happens. Ganyu was silent in the matter, and while she appreciated Keqing's words, the past still haunted her as much as the emotions. Therefore, she just continued to cry her heart out, and Keqing stayed with her the entire time. Comforting, understanding, embracing. Keqing was there for all of it, and wasn't annoyed or bothered by it at all. After an hour of releasing her emotions, Ganyu and Keqing finally returned to Yelan's camp, their host still sitting in the same spot with her legs crossed in comfort. Feel better? Yelan asked Ganyu. Very, and I have full confidence in her ability to learn Reshov, shall it come to that conclusion. Ganyu replied confidently. I'm glad. Yelan responded. In your absence, I've come up with a plan to make this plan go more foolproof. So listen closely. My plan is for me to intersect the letter for Starchovsky by heading to the closest route that delivers mail to Snezhnaya. Don't worry, I'm much aware of the routes, and considering it's only been a single day, it hasn't gotten very far. I have my ways of intersecting deliveries, so you have no worries in that regard, girls. What about us? Keqing asked. I'll need you to write the acting grandmaster a letter, seeing as soon as that letter is intersected, I'll need to alert them to our new plan. It can't be you two who delivered the letter, seeing the acting grandmaster was right about one thing. That place is crawling with Fatui members that can very well be in connection with Starchovsky or the Tsaritsa. If they see you, they'll know something's up and alert Reshov instantly. To get this rat into our trap, you two must remain completely absent. They won't recognize me, seeing I'm not a common resident of Mondstadt. So with me delivering the letter, suspicion is averted. Keqing and Ganyu nodded, following with Yelan's request. Upon receiving a blank piece of parchment paper and writing utensil, Ganyu wrote a letter to alert Jean of the change of plans. It took her only minutes to write, fold up, and seal in an envelope, following up by giving it to Yelan. Good timing, Ganyu. Yelan complimented, sticking the letter somewhere safe, and then grabbing her bow. I'll need to get moving if I am going to intersect that message in time. For now, you two just do your best to stay out of sight somewhere. We will. Keqing confirmed. Good luck out there. See you gals in about a week. Yelan finished, then took off on a run into the open world of Teyvat. Upon Yelan's departure, Ganyu and Keqing met each other's gaze in planning for their next move. So, what do we do next? Ganyu questioned. I think our best move is to just head back to Dawn Winery and stay low until we receive news from Jean. Keqing analyzed. I agree. Ganyu accepted. There's no Fatui and we don't have to fight for resources. However, there's still one thing we still haven't figured out. The very reason we're out here in the first place. Keqing nodded. I know. But once we get some answers, finding them will be easier. We just need to be patient for now, even if it seems wrong. Ganyu reluctantly nodded in agreement, to which Keqing followed with an attempt to reassure her colleague. Hey, we'll find them, okay? She attempted, putting a hand on Ganyu's left shoulder. Ganyu didn't answer immediately, but eventually found words to speak. Okay. I trust you. With that said, Ganyu and Keqing armed themselves with their respected weapons again, and began their journey back to Dawn Winery. One week later, Ganyu yawned in her wake to her current temporary room, stretching her limbs and moving to her only window to allow the sunshine in. Sliding the aged drapes, stitched and decorated with the emblem of her host's family, the rays of warm, radiant sunshine washed over Ganyu's body like a warm hug. She was currently dressed in a nightgown that Diluc had generously gifted her and Keqing a pair of, much more comfortable than the spare attire that Jean had given them as temporary wear. The material it had been sewn together with was soft and strong, making it easy for her to fall asleep every night over the past week of suspense, something she had desperately needed ever since this chaotic trip had started, and had gained a ton of strength back from as a result. A light smile graced her lips as she moved from out of the window's view and undressed her body of the night attire into a set of clothes that matched her daily clothes she had lost to the destruction of Liyue Harbor. Diluc had commissioned her and Keqing clothes that they'd feel more at home in, Keqing's being easier to describe due to her still having the same outfit from the night she had nearly lost her life stowed away. Ganyu had found the offer too much, but eventually she was persuaded and gave Diluc every detail she could remember about her casual attire she'd worn as the secretary of Yuehai Pavilion. While she couldn't remember every single detail, the clothing looked like an exact copy, and when she had seen herself dressed in them for the first time, it felt as if she were back in Liyue Harbor, sorting documents and paper in her isolated office space. It had brought a tear to her eye, and Keqing had shared the same reaction upon seeing herself back in her Yuheng occupation dressing. Tying her long, icy locks into their usual ponytail hairstyle, Ganyu finished her waking rituals with a simple sliding of both of her feet into her usual heels, then moved to the door and down to breakfast. Keqing and Diluc were already feasting on their own choices of morning protein, calories, and vitamins upon her approach. A steaming cup of black coffee rested off to the side of their plates. Her heels clacking against the marble flooring were what caught their attention, greeting her newest company in earnest. "Good morning," Keqing greeted with a smile. "Good morning, Keqing," Ganyu greeted back, smiling and moving to the seat next to her colleague. "I apologize if I slept in." "It's fine," Diluc assured. "Please, help yourself to whatever you want." "Just a cup of coffee is fine," Ganyu assured. "I've never been a big partaker in breakfast meals." Diluc nodded. "As you wish." Ganyu nodded in return, moving to the resting coffee pot in the nearby kitchen and pouring herself a piping hot serving. After serving herself, she carefully maneuvered back to the long table her comrades were seated at and took a seat next to Keqing. "Has there been any news?" Ganyu asked. Diluc nodded as an answer, following up with more details. "Your fellow friend came through. As planned, Reshov has taken the bait and should be in Mondstadt this afternoon." "Is he alone?" Keqing inquired. "According to what your friend said in her letter, he has no tagalongs. But given the Fatui are crawling all over within Mondstadt's walls, there's no telling if Reshov decided to take extra caution." "I see," Keqing replied. "In that case, we'll have to be on our toes. This man is the reason Liyue Harbor and Ningguang no longer exist, so we cannot afford to even flinch once." Ganyu assured her colleague by resting her left hand atop Keqing's right, causing her to turn to her friend in response. "What happened that night will not happen again," Ganyu assured with confidence. "I refuse to let him hurt you or anyone ever again." Keqing's cheeks adorned a slight blush, but she smiled at the clear statement and promise. "Right," Keqing assured back, showing her comrade that she was confident things would be different this time. "The element of surprise will hopefully be on our side this time," Diluc added. "I promise that you two will not be subjected to the pain you experienced that night. Just go with the plan, and we will finally gain a victory against whoever is pulling the strings." The two nodded, and as if it were their last meal, allowed themselves time to finish their preferred breakfasts. During the downing of her energy-inducing concoction, Ganyu's thoughts were only a repetitive rehearsal of the steps of the plan, because she was dead serious about putting this bastard somewhere where she could relentlessly wring him dry of every bit of information he had about what was going on behind the scenes. She didn't care if she had to break his bones, cut his flesh, or beat him to death. She would get answers and deal him the price of mass genocide. Once they'd finished their respective meals, they each retired to their respective quarters to prepare for the battle ahead. Ganyu had contemplated on leaving her vision behind, seeing elemental attacks were pointless, up until she remembered that Lisa had been tasked with finding a counterspell to the issue. She just burned into her mind not to use her elemental powers until she knew it was safe to do so, grabbing her bow, speaking a prayer to Morax, and finally moving back to the foyer to meet up with her company. Upon meeting the area, Keqing was armed with her sword and carried a look of focus, and Diluc's back was adorned with a massive claymore. Everyone was ready to finally meet and serve this bastard his just desserts. "Let's go," Diluc ordered, to which Keqing and Ganyu followed, exiting the winery and starting for the gates of Mondstadt. An oppressive group of gray clouds lingered over the city of Mondstadt as Ganyu took her position. She had not even passed the gate to the city, and had taken guard in a spot where she was well hidden. As for her companions, they had proceeded to Angel Share to meet up with Jean and the others for a last-minute relay on the plan. To Ganyu's understanding, the plan was to lure Starchovsky somewhere where he couldn't be seen by any prying Fatui, and once he was trapped, would be detained and taken somewhere else to be questioned. The detainment would be where Yelan would come in, having spoken with Jean over the past week about the current course of action. She had decided to be the one to submit Starchovsky, being more trained to drop enemies to their knees, even well-trained Fatui soldiers. Yelan was definitely the best shot and candidate, so it was decided. Ganyu would be the eyes for Starchovsky's arrival and would signal Amber atop the stone wall of Mondstadt to fire a pyro-infused arrow into the sky. That would be the alert for Jean and the others residing in the Knights of Favonia's headquarters to prepare for their target's arrival. From there, Kaya would escort Reshov into the building, and that would be the cue for someone on the outside to lock the doors. Thereon, things would get dangerous. But Yelan had devised a clever tactic to get Reshov to a point where he could be submitted by elemental attacks, by lacing the door with the counterspell. It was a clever idea based off of predictable human tactics, the first instinct in an uncontrollable situation being to exit through the closest door. Once he touched it, not only would it make him vulnerable to elemental attacks, but would also inflict a searing dose of excruciating pain to his nerves. Enough pain to drop any human or non-human. Once submitted, Reshov would be rendered defenseless and knocked out by either the pain or strike by Keqing. On surface, it seemed foolproof, but Ganyu had seen many plans like these fail due to one overseen mistake. She wasn't expecting this to go smooth at all, and knew that once Reshov was through that gate, she wouldn't just stay put. That's exactly why Liyue Harbor was destroyed, and she wasn't going to let Starchovsky claim any more lives. Everybody was ready to do their part in catching this maniac, and upon the distant church bell of Mondstadt ringing out 12 times, the time was close to Reshov's arrival. To be sure she wouldn't be caught by the slightest glimpse of her foe's eye, she retracted more from her small opening in the tree just 20 yards off the left side of the bridge. She knew she was very well camouflaged, but there was nothing wrong with making sure she was absolutely undetectable by anyone except the squirrels residing in the tree's thick cover of branches and pine needles. Time passed, but around 20 minutes after the chiming of the Mondstadt Cathedral's bell, a lone man came into view at the opposite side of the bridge. He was tall and slender, dressed in attire that Ganyu recognized as Shneznayan, and appeared older in age. Ganyu knew very well that he was their target, and had to do everything possible to prevent herself from firing an arrow through his head. While he had been cloaked that night, every fiber of her being knew that this was the very person that had murdered her boss and destroyed her home. As he came to the gate, Ganyu watched the bridge for any unwanted stowaways, and was glad to see that no activity had occurred. It was a minute before Reshov had finally met all the customs of the new security system Jean had ordered for her knights to follow, and once he had passed the threshold, Ganyu watched as the scheduled signal had taken to the sky like a miniature asteroid or comet. It had been fired high enough to avoid going no farther than Cider Lake upon its descent. The last thing needed in this current situation was an accidental forced fire, so Amber had made sure to angle her shot to where the water of the reservoir would simmer it out. Ganyu trusted Amber enough to know her shot would be seen from the windows of Jean's office, so she awaited the next phase of her part to the plan. Amber would signal her from outside the gate to come out as soon as she saw Reshov make it far enough into the city. The next part of the scheme was to shut the gates, but it had to be done when Reshov met the upper section of Mondstadt, so she awaited Amber's presence to meet the outside of the gate. Around 2 minutes later, Amber had made it to the outside of the main entrance and signaled her to come down from the tree. Ganyu followed and carefully made her way down, meeting up with her red-clad comrade at the archway of the opening to Mondstadt's inner city. "Well, that went surprisingly well," Amber celebrated. "Indeed, but we best still be on our toes," Ganyu ordered. "While he may be in the walls, there's no telling what's going to happen when the time comes to catch him." "Understood," Amber agreed. "The gates will be closed as soon as Kaya's informant near the Knights of Favonia's headquarters sees our target enter the building. From there, I guess it's up to Jean and the others to finish the job." Ganyu nodded. "Take a deep breath, Amber. Once he enters that building and these gates close, the real battle begins." Jean's office door opened to the sight of said person seated at her desk, entering her trusted cavalry captain and a man dressed in Snezhnayan attire that clarified his identity. Jean's eyes averted from her desk to her new company, knowing that she had to be careful. The plan had reached its most critical state, and she had to play every one of her cards right. "This man requests your attention," Kaya played, going along with everything he had been directed to do. "Ah, you must be Mr. Starchovsky," Jean greeted as she would with any guest. "Please, have a seat and we'll discuss the matters that were stated in my letter." "Gladly," Reshov agreed. "I'm pleased to be in the company of such a noble individual, unlike the mongrels that questioned and harassed me at your gate." Seating himself, Kaya took his leave and moved across the corridor to Lisa's library. Once he reached her desk, he stated only a simple confirmation that gave Lisa assurance to proceed. "The rat is in the trap." Lisa followed with a smile, moving from her desk out of her humble abode of a massive collection of literature, fiction, and nonfiction. She moved back to the corridor with Kaya and began her work by enchanting the doors with some sort of powerful spell she had conjured from her most ancient spellbooks. The spell radiated a blue glow, but carried an essence of danger. Something that only heavily experienced mages such as Lisa herself could sense immediately upon meeting its range. It was clear that the spell made Lisa uncomfortable, but she powered through the unease that the hex caused her, knowing she only had limited time and had to do this for the sake of not just Mondstadt, but the entirety of Teyvat. Upon finishing the final casting, she found herself clenching her chest and struggling to catch her breath. There was no doubt the spell was powerful and took a ton of energy to cast effectively, but the task was done, and that was enough for Lisa to smile at. Kaya assisted his fellow knight back to her feet and back to the comfort of her desk in the library, to which Lisa accepted and followed, Once she was back in her preferred space, Kaya moved to the next phase of the plan, treading to the most distant desk in the massive space of books, shelves, and silence. At the desk was one lone occupant, their face cloaked by a book, but her two long violet locks of hair being enough to clarify her identity. "Everything's in place," Kaya addressed, causing the recipient to lower her practical mask and meet Kaya's gaze. "Good. Now, we just need to pray that he doesn't suspect anything," Keqing replied. "Indeed," Kaya agreed. "However, my question to you is, do you think you're ready to face the very person responsible for your current situation?" Keqing wore a stern expression, nodding her head in assurance. "I am. While he did cause all of this, I also know that he's the key to figuring out the next course of action, so you don't need to worry about me making any reckless decisions." Kaya nodded. "That's great to hear, because I have a feeling things are about to get pretty interesting. Best be in our right minds going into the next phase of our mission." "Right." Keqing averted her gaze to the nearby window, where she could see the view of the darkened clouds masking the skies of Teyvat. "I just hope everyone is on the same page." She thought to herself, "We can't lose today. The fate of the world depends on it." A good amount of time passed before Kaya had alerted Keqing and Lisa to prepare for action. Jean had done all she could to keep Reshov busy, but eventually her attempts to keep him bound to her office met their end, and her enemy had gotten up from his seat to take his leave. They had discussed a fictional deal for trade of weapons between Snezhnaya and Mondstadt for advancements in technology. Reshov had been very interested, causing the meetup to last nearly a full hour, enough time to give the others time to prepare for the incoming brawl. Yelan was in wait on the second floor, her signal to interfere being when Reshov received his nasty dose of excruciating pain from the counterspell. It would be enough to drop him like a rock, and would give Yelan an opportunity to tie him up with no risk of him fighting back. That was, only if the spell was able to drop him. If it wasn't, Keqing and the others would have no choice but to fight him without the use of elemental energy. It was risky, but in a case as such, it was expected, which is what put everyone in full focus mode. Once Reshov touched that exit, it was do or die. Reshov pushed Jean's office door open and moved into the corridor, unaware of what awaited him upon his attempt to leave. "A pleasure doing business with you, Grandmaster Jean," he complimented. "I look forward to our partnership." "Likewise, Mr. Starchovsky," Jean replied, preparing herself. "Safe travels back to Snezhnaya." Reshov nodded in agreement and started for the exit, placing his right hand on the door handle to open it. Upon the slightest touch, Reshov's body was injected with Lisa's hex, his body going as stiff as a board and his legs collapsing from underneath him. "Now!" Jean ordered loud enough for her fellow comrades to hear, to which Keqing, Kaya, Lisa, and Yelan followed. The group of friends and allies met Reshov's body instantly, Yelan using her bracelet's string to bind both of his legs together, rendering him unable to separate them or run. She followed up by yanking his grip away from the door and moving fast to bind his two limp arms together. She finished by hog-tying him as an extra precaution, and once done, dragged her catch to the center of the corridor. Everyone was still at full alert, knowing that this man was capable of inhuman tactics and murder. Therefore, Yelan made sure the strength of her knots was solid before allowing anyone to approach. Once she was sure, she allowed her fellow comrades to come forth. Keqing was the first to move, closing in on her greatest enemy with just enough restriction to avoid crushing the bastard's skull to nothing but a bloody pulp. Instead, she just eyed Reshov with disgust and victory, saying only one thing to his bound body. "Remember me?" Reshav's eyes slowly shifted to Keqing's, standing high above him. He was slowly losing consciousness, so Keqing made sure that her next words were heard loud and clear. "I survived." Reshav tried to say something, but fell unconscious before the words could escape his throat. Having had her word with him, Keqing turned to her band of allies and stated one last thing. "Take him away." Keqing ordered. "I'll go get Ganyu for the next course of action." "Gladly," Yelan assured. "Don't worry. He's not going anywhere while he's in my grasp." Jean added her own words amongst the victory of their efforts. "Be sure to exit Mondstadt undetected. We can't have the Fatui suspecting anything." "Don't worry. I'll take the back way that I entered through." Keqing assured. "The Fatui have no idea I'm even here, nor that this monster is even in any sort of danger." Jean nodded in assurance. "All right. Be safe, Lady Keqing. I'll be waiting here to escort you to where we plan to take him for interrogation. A place where we will not be interrupted, shall the Fatui get suspicious." Keqing nodded, then departed the building, making sure not to touch the handle on her way out. Upon the door closing, Jean turned to Lisa. "Best remove these hexes from the doors, Lisa. We don't want a fellow knight to accidentally end up like our target here." Lisa smiled at the statement. "As you wish. But in return for the amount of energy I've had to use just to cast these spells, I'd like you to buy me a drink at Angel Share after we're finished playing with this brute." Jean giggled at the condition, not surprised at it the slightest bit. "I'd say that's fair. But first, let's get our newest guest settled in." Yelan caught the order and followed it, her partner Kaya assisting her in picking up Reshav and leading her to their next destination, a secret area of Mondstadt that had been abandoned ever since the days of the Lawrence clan's cruel reign over the city. The Mondstadt Catacombs. A set of grunts escaped Reshav's mouth upon his wake in a near-complete darkness. The only light was a lantern, and 4 lit torches in each corner of his small space that he now occupied, and upon trying to move, found that he couldn't. His arms and legs were bound by rope, and he was seated in a wooden chair. It took a minute for his eyes to adjust to his current area, but once his vision was clear, he found that he wasn't alone. Before him were 4 figures, one taller than the other 3, and barely visible by the faint amount of light. "Oh good, he's finally awake," spoke a deep, smooth, and feminine voice. "Now we can finally have some fun." Another voice intervened almost instantly. "Easy. I know you want to give him what he clearly deserves, but we need him alive to get what we want from him." The second voice was similar, but more mature and authoritative, and upon the faces of his captors coming further into the light, Reshav recognized only one of the 4 women that were eyeing him like a predator to prey. "Ugh, where am I? And what is the meaning of this?" Reshav exclaimed towards Jean, clearly irritated and lost on the matter. "You drag me into your city only to knock me unconscious and tie me up?" Do you realize who you are dealing with? His exclamation was followed up with the sword's tip meeting his vision, just inches from cutting into his flesh. It silenced him almost instantly, now aware that his captors weren't just casuals he could intimidate. Silence! Keqing commanded. We know very well who you are, as much as what you did to the place we once called home. We also know that you know exactly why you're here, so don't even think you can weasel your way out of this with lies. What in the world are you talking about? He questioned, seeming legitimately confused. I'm a simple SNES-9 official who negotiates with other people on business matters. You are mistaken on whatever you have brought me here for. Another voice cut through the damp air of the cell. You're lying, Ganyu claimed confidently. I recognize your voice. You were the one on the dock that night that killed the Tianquan, blew up the city, and spared me. Don't even bother questioning my ability to recognize a voice, because being half Adeptus, I have a great memory. A memory that ranges over 3,000 years of life. So you can either stop lying, or we can get you to do what we want the hard way. And trust me when I say that we have no trouble doing things the hard way. Yelan added, You killed and destroyed an entire city, so it's only fair we deliver you the equivalent of giving you the most agonizing death possible. By that, I mean that your life won't go until you give us the information we want. We can peel your flesh off, burn you, rip your teeth out, and much worse before we even let you die. I've done such to others like you for information, so don't even think for a second I'm feeding you false threats. Nobody can hear you down here, nor will your fellow snakes ever find you. So if I were you, I'd start talking and cut the lies. Reshov was intimidated, pinned, and he knew that they weren't bluffing. So he tried his best to reason with the four ladies. I'm telling you, I have no idea who any of you are minus her. He pleaded, directing his gaze at Jean. I have done past dealings with the city you are referring to, but would never try anything malicious such as genocide on its people. Whatever you are thinking I did no such thing. He seemed legitimate, but Yelan shook her head at the words, being experienced in interrogation and knowing how to read her target like a book. Stubborn and well-versed in the art of lying. Exactly what I expected from someone of your caliber. Yelan stated. However, there's only one problem with your tactics, honey. Yelan had met the back of Reshov's chair, and like a flick of a switch, lifted her right leg up to catch the back of the chair. Following that, she lowered her leg at the same speed, bringing Reshov down to where he was staring upward at Yelan like an ant to a monolith. He grunted from the force of the fall, the impact having knocked the breath out of him and causing him to cough. I can read through your pleas with little to no effort, just like I have while making your comrades wet themselves out of absolute terror. Now, unless you start listening and stop your useless attempts to fool us into letting you go, I'll make this little fall seem like a pinch in comparison to what I plan to inflict on you. Ganyu, Jean, and Keqing were terrified at the state of Yelan. She wasn't kidding or lying about anything, and the thought of what could make his current collapse to the floor seem like a mere scratch in comparison to other tactics sent shivers down their spines. Neither Ganyu or Keqing had seen the sight of Yelan, and now understood why Ningguang had trusted her with getting even the most valuable of information out of people who most likely would keep their mouths shut. Reshov was petrified in fear at Yelan's words, and it was clear as day, but he still stuck to his original claims. I'm serious. I have no idea what you think I did, but I didn't do it. Please, I'm being honest. Ganyu almost believed that Reshov was telling the truth, but she trusted Yelan's experience more. They had literally figured out that it was him there that night, and Ganyu knew that voice was the same. Seeing the events of that night had traumatized her. It was in no doubt the man they were looking for, so she didn't intervene and just let Yelan do her work. If anything, Reshov deserved whatever was coming his way. Very well. If you choose to accept torture, then I'll deliver you what you wish. Lady Keqing, would you mind lending me your sword? With zero hesitation, Keqing slid her weapon from its sheath and held it out to her colleague. Gladly, Miss Yelan. She responded. Yelan took the blade in her grip and stared down her prey once again with predatory eyes. This is your last chance to speak before I make you suffer irreparable damage. Speak up, or allow me to show you that I'm a lady of my word. Reshov only continued his fruitless efforts to escape the binds that held him tight, to which Yelan merely smiled deviously at. She held her word, walking over to one of the nearby torches and allowing the bright flames to embrace the tip of the blade. It was a slow and tense process of waiting for the sword's sharp end to turn a bloody red color, Yelan removing her tool from the heat of the torch and eyeing Reshov like a carnivorous animal fixing to rip into its meal's jugular. Reshov's movements increased tenfold, but the knots rendered the rope binding his arms and legs unaffected by his attempts of escape. You think you are so clever, honey, but allow me to show you what happens when you meet your match. Yelan stated, moving the blade to his forehead. With gentle and sinister care, Yelan placed the blade against the surface of his forehead, immediately erupting with a sizzling noise and causing Reshov to scream and struggle all the more in his binds. Yelan added pressure to his flesh, similar to how a cook would flatten a burger patty on the grill for proper assurance that it would be finished on both sides, and just watched Reshov squirm and writhe in pain in his inescapable state. After a long 10 seconds, Yelan released the pressure and allowed her victim freedom of the searing pain. Upon seeing the damage, all that remained was a charred portion of dead flesh that was steaming like meat in a pan. Reshov continued to shout and yell in severe agony at his irreparable injury that he'd forever see as a reminder of his incompetence anytime he'd look in a mirror. Yelan handed Keqing back her sword, to which the recipient just held it in her grip, fully aware the sheath would burst into flame if she slid it back in. After the torture tool was returned to its rightful owner, she walked back over to Reshov and set his chair back up onto its 4 wooden legs. Now you know what those people felt that night, and can live with a constant mark that will make you relive that pain. Yelan stated with triumph. However, if you think for a second that that's the worst thing I can do to you, you're dead wrong. Therefore, unless you want your pain to worsen, I'd suggest you start talking. Her voice was calm, despite the things that he had done, and in the eyes of Keqing and Ganyu, if she had a calm demeanor in such a tense situation, it meant bad things for Reshov. Apparently, Reshov had gotten the message as well, considering after a minute of calming down and somewhat adapting to his pain, he didn't hesitate to drop the act he'd been playing. All right, I'll talk. He assured out of desperation to avoid another torturous act by his worst enemy. That's more like it. Now, you will answer whatever these two ladies ask. Any sort of resistance will end you up in pain beyond your wildest dreams. Do I make myself clear? Affirmative! He pleaded, turning his gaze to Keqing and Ganyu. Well, you heard our little rat. Ladies, ask whatever you wish. Ganyu and Keqing nodded, walking forward and eyeing the cause of their current situation with absolute hatred. First things first. Keqing started. What's the motive behind all of this? Why did you kill the Tianquan and destroy Liyue Harbor? I suggest you choose your words very carefully. Keqing showed she wasn't kidding by holding her blazing hot sword's tip to where it was inches from his face. He nodded to show that he understood, following up with an answer. I'm just following orders. I was ordered to eliminate all of Liyue Harbor. Seeing we knew that you were on to us. Who's us? Keqing demanded. No, my team of fellow soldiers. We are custom-designed super soldiers by the Shnesnayan scientists of the highest ranks. We were created as a crucial part of a master plan being executed by the Tsaritsa to eliminate all of the Archon capitals and their gods as well. Her Majesty plans to recreate a world with new gods, with her being the leader of all these new gods in a whole new world. Ganyu jumped at the mention of new gods, knowing now that Rex Lapis was in definite danger. She spoke up instantly. You say she plans to make new gods, but what does she plan to do with the current ones? Ganyu demanded. I'm not sure. Yelan didn't even need to act upon that, Keqing taking the initiative to show Reshav that he'd messed up majorly. Wrong answer, she declared, pulling back her blade and stabbing the tip of it into Reshav's right shoulder. Once again, Reshav screamed in agony and shook in the chair. However, upon noticing something in particular, the whole situation changed. Reshav's wound didn't leak blood, but something black. And upon inspecting the wound closer, all of them connected the dots. Wires. The substance leaking out was oil, and the person known as Reshav Starchovsky was an android. Upon making the discovery, the machine changed its demeanor and appeared less in pain and more as if it had claimed victory in something. At long last you put the pieces together. No human, not even a god, is capable of what I did to kill your precious leader. Only engineering and godly power are capable of such abilities, and if you think I'm the only one of my kind, you are sorely mistaken. As we speak, an army of machines just like me are being created in a place that only those who created me know of. All of your efforts have been for nothing, and soon your existence will be terminated. No god can stop us, nor can any weak or pathetic mortal. Upon the statement of godly power being used to create these androids with Archon-like strength and abilities, Ganyu found the answer to her own question. They're using the Adepti and Archon's energy to power the machines. The Tsaritsa is going to use them as a battery until they have nothing left to give. Reshav laughed in response. showing that Ganyu had hit the nail on the head. Aren't you a smart one? Now I'm really glad that I spared you that night. Seeing the look of horror on your face at the realization of the truth is truly an amazing sight to behold. Anger, horror, sadness. They all engulfed Ganyu at the reality of the situation. She fell to her knees in defeat, tears starting to flood from her eyes. Keqing wanted to comfort her friend, but jumped at the sudden action of Reshav's head being severed from his shoulders. Oil and sparks from the cut erupted, following with the rest of the mechanical corpse limply falling forward. Yelan retrieved her hydro-infused rope to her bracelet, having been the culprit for Reshav's demise. Thought he'd never shut up. Yelan stated calmly, turning her gaze to Ganyu. Get up. Now's not the time for tears, dear. Ganyu's head slowly lifted from her lap, wiping away her tears and doing her best to recuperate. What are we going to do? Ganyu asked, her words coming out in between tears. Keqing followed up by holding her hand out to her fallen comrade, along with a simple statement. We're going to stop the Tsaritsa and her army of artificial gods. Ganyu took Keqing's hand and made her way back to her feet, trying to figure out how her colleagues could be so calm in the current situation. But where do we even start? We have no leads, no plan, and are completely outmatched in power and numbers. How the hell are we even going to have a chance of going against the Tsaritsa? With this, Yelan inquired, holding Reshav's head in her palm as if it were a trophy. Get ready, girls, because we're going to Sumeru.